Joining us once again is Charles Coulombe. He is with TumblerHouse.com, has a podcast called Off the Menu. He's the author of many books, for instance, Puritan's Empire, The Blessed Charles of Austria, and he joins us now by Zoom. Good morning to you, Mr. Charles Coulombe.
Good morning, Joe. Good to see you.
Praise be to God. It's good to have you back on the show. There's a question we've been sort of discussing off air as a team here, philosophizing about, and we thought it'd be fun to kind of have a bigger conversation about it. And we thought of you in the meantime. Should Catholics put themselves in situations, occupations or otherwise, where they would be away from the sacraments for extended periods of time? Now, there's a whole host of potential scenarios that I can think of, but let me start with asking you about early exploration. We think of Christopher Columbus, who went off into the somewhat unknown. I think they had an idea of what they were doing, but nonetheless, they didn't know how it was going to come out, and they didn't have a priest on board. Should Catholics be doing stuff like that?
Not if you can avoid it. I mean, I have no doubt in his case that it was purely a lack of personnel and not intent. Because Lord knows, when you look at the annals of the French, Spanish, and Portuguese explorers, whenever they could have priests, they did. And sometimes they're the only, the writings of the given priest are the only record we have of a given trip. So, I mean, as with everything else in life, you've got to do what you've got to do. Obviously, if you can't get a priest, you can't get a priest. But having said that, there's a great danger. And the great danger is that if you don't frequent the sacraments, bearing in mind that the devil is always working on us to loosen our faith and destroy it entirely if he can, it's a good way to lose it. I mean, the history of our own country and the enormous number of Catholics who were lost on the frontier because they had no access to priests and the sacraments.
Yeah.
I mean, huge. You look at all the people just to pull a couple of rabbits out of a single green hat. Look at all the people with Irish names in Texas.
Yeah.
Their ancestors were Catholic. But they lost the faith within a generation or two because they didn't have access to the sacraments.
How does one keep the faith, like whenever these people who did travel to the States and to other places exploring, a lot of them did retain the faith? How did that happen without having access to like the sacraments and to priests and to religious?
Observing the church here as well as they could, to be honest with you. It was, I mean, also you can look at the Japanese Catholics who managed without priests for 250 years. What did they do? Well, they had two sacraments. They had baptism and they had marriage. And as a result, baptism and marriage took on an importance. I mean, baptism should always be ultra important. It's the key to the other sacraments. But it took on an importance that was really amazing because that was all they had. And marriage, that was the only other sacrament they had access to. Those two and the fact that their lives are dry in martyrdoms, that was all they had.
They would have, they would have to offer up every single suffering with such humility and intention. And I think about my own personal life, right, where I have access to the sacraments. I can go to very frequent confession, praise be to God, and yet it is still a daily struggle. I mean, maybe it's because I have access to the confession that I maybe don't put as much effort into, even the concupiscent nature of venial sins, those kinds of things. Whereas I can't imagine, I love history. I read a lot of history books. And all of those pioneers post-American Revolution who made their way, those Catholics who made their way out of Maryland, out of Virginia, and made their way towards the Ohio territories, slaughtered by Indians in some cases. I mean, think about the great peril of sickness, of the opportunity to die at the hands of conflict. Golly gee whiz. It just seems as a Catholic, I mean, as I love exploration, I like to adventure, I like travel. But at the same time, should Catholics be participating in these activities?
Well, again, it depends on the how, the why, the what. It hit me yesterday. I was in LA for 3 weeks. I flew back Wednesday. I started my trip back, I should say, Wednesday evening, LA time. I arrived in Paris yesterday. I spent 5 hours in Paris, and I hit the Chapel of the Miraculous Medal on the Rue de Bac and Sacré-Cœur, and then I went to bed here in Austria. Now, that's very, very different from our ancestors, for whom coming to America was a life sentence, usually. They didn't generally go back. Sometimes they did, but most people did not do a lot of transatlantic crossing unless they were either very wealthy or worked for the church or the government. And if they worked for the church, they were very often missionaries coming back to Europe to do fundraising. Anyway, it all depends. I mean, in none of these things is there a one-size-fits-all. I could turn the thing around on you.
Okay.
What about those settlements? And Marycrest comes to mind, a post-war experiment in upstate New York, where you've got a priest, you've got access to the sacraments, and you're going to form a perfect Catholic colony away from the evil of the world so your children will keep the faith. Well, that's actually been done several times, including on the frontier. The town of St. Nazianz in Indiana, which was founded by German Catholic colonists with precisely that idea in mind. But they didn't last. And they had access to the sacraments, but they didn't remain what they set out to be. The question is why? And I think, it's something I've given a lot of thought to, frankly. I think the problem is when Catholics look at these things purely in terms of a retreat from a bad world, as opposed to a retreat in order to evangelize, it fails. Because we're not allowed. I mean, even the Benedictine monasteries that we think of as pure refuges, well, they saved the faith in Europe and as a byproduct, European civilization. But why? Well, that wasn't the main reason for doing what they did. The main reason was for pursuing holiness. But part of pursuing holiness is evangelization. There cannot be, even Saint Therese of Lisieux, who is about as contemplative and interior person as you're going to get, considered a big piece of her work to be offering up her prayers and sufferings for the missionaries. And she used to say that had she been born a man, that's what she would have done. So,
go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, I think a lot depends on what you conceive what you're doing to be. If you see it as spreading the faith, if you see it as evangelizing, if you try to make it that, then that's very, very different than just, well.
I do want to follow up on something you said a minute ago, though, before I move on to some modern examples, Mr. Coulombe, about these perfect Catholic communities. We're seeing this trend again. We're seeing them, Ave Maria Radio, or Ave Maria in Florida, rather, as sort of an example of that. There was an effort here in Texas, in Upper East Texas, that's been trying to do that. We've seen that again and again. Do you see anything different in these new initiatives versus the one you stated up in New York?
Well, I mean,
or
in
Indiana.
The case of either one, Indiana or New York, both. I don't know what the one in Texas is about, frankly, so I can't comment. With Ave Maria, the fact is that they support a university, which apparently will, one hopes, produce an educated class of people who make changes in society as a whole. And that, I mean, again, I don't know that much about the way they work, although I've been there, I have seen the place. That, at least that idea is precisely what I have in mind. It's a little bit like during the periods of the penal times in England and Scotland and Ireland, the various English, Scots, and Irish Catholic colleges in Europe, Rome and France and elsewhere, were refuges for Englishmen, Scotsmen, and Irishmen to come and be educated and to live the faith in a particularly English, Scottish, or Irish manner, but always with the idea that they were going to go back to try to help their countrymen regain their faith. So, as I say, if it's done as a means to a greater and higher evangelization, then I think it has a much better chance at succeeding and sustaining than if it's simply a question of pulling away from badness.
Okay, that makes me think, because when Columbus sailed, he was not sailing thinking he was going to just some deserted land to just go exploring. He had an intention to go to the West Indies to get money to be able to fund the Crusades. He had a holy vision of what he was doing. And this kind of idea comes right back to what we're talking about, these Christian colonies, these Catholic colonies. And I like what you said before the break about the fact that the Catholic people need to have a spirit of evangelization or else they lose the faith. I am very good friends with the TFP in Houston, and they often will talk about these Catholic colonies, these traditionalist colonies that people try to pop up, and how it's dangerous because the children do not learn that they're in a battle, that they're fighting against the world. And when they do that, they fall into a malaise. And a lot of times, not always, of course, but a lot of times they lose their faith when they realize they're not in a battle, they're not trying to evangelize, they're not trying to spread the faith. And I think this leads to the question that Joe wanted to talk about us coming into here is, if we were exploring somewhere in particular, we were talking about going to Mars privately, the three of us. We're like, what if we went to Mars and you didn't have a priest go with you? Like, what would that be like? But talking about this spirit of evangelization, like, why are we going to Mars? Like, there's no Martians there. There's like, there's no spirit of evangelization, of trying to convert people, of this kind of mentality. What do you think about this, Charles Coulombe?
Well, I mean, again, God always brings good out of both evil and neutral stuff. Let's put it this way. There'll be settlements on Mars as soon as there's money to be made out of it. All right. That's just the way life is. Presuming that we don't have some sort of technological fallback and that we continue to advance technologically, which, who knows, we'll see. If there is an economic drive to go to Mars, we will go to Mars. That's just the way these things tend to work. But if that happens, there will be Martians, there'll be us, and there'll be souls to be saved on Mars. Now, do I think that that's a wonderful idea? Well, I'll tell you, I've always been fascinated with Mars since the time I was a boy. But of course, the Mars of reality is not the Mars of Edgar Rice Burroughs or Ray Bradbury. That being said, the minute there is a permanent colony on Mars, for whatever,
sounds like we're having some internet trouble with Charles Coulombe here.
Then suddenly there'll be a field of eventually.
Charles, we're having some. You're breaking up. You're coming in and out on that on your connection. So hopefully your connection will settle down and we'll get you back on. Let us know if you can hear us. But we're having a conversation about the sort of this philosophical idea about whether or not Catholics should be in exploration or put themselves in situations where they are going to be away for extended periods of time. I was thinking of the military as well. I know when it comes to Mars, Elon Musk's vision of SpaceX is to colonize Mars. I mean, he's got a whole entire video explaining exactly how he intends to do that, how he intends to ship people and material and terraform it.
Yeah.
And in his entire video I watched, I don't know, a year or so ago, no mention of religion, no mention of chaplains or chapels or any of it. Just people who can perform certain jobs are going to be needed. So how many Catholics, because they're like, Mars, I get to go to Mars? Yes, sign me up, would jump to that, but not have any access whatsoever. I mean, it's one thing to come across an ocean. It's another to fly, through in rocket ships across space to a planet that takes you literally months to get to. I mean, many more months than it ever did Christopher Columbus to sail across the Atlantic. Charles Coulombe, are you rejoining us now?
I am indeed. The peculiarities of the internet done transcontinental.
Yeah, exactly.
They don't want us talking about this.
Yeah, it's too bizarre for words. But no, I don't know what you called what I said. What I said was that there will, in all likelihood, if there's money to be made out of it, there will be colonies on Mars. And if there will be a field for evangelization. Wherever mankind goes, the church has to go with it.
One thing I was saying while you were reconnecting with us was I was talking about Elon Musk and SpaceX and his grand design to colonize Mars, which he put out a detailed video about a year or so ago or more. And there's no mention of religion in it, or priests or chaplains or anybody. They just want the workers. And my thought was, how many Catholics would be excited about being a part of that mission, going to Mars, but not have any access to a priest to hear their confessions or provide them, the Holy Communion or whatever. It just seems like in that example, I find there are differences between that and Christopher Columbus. There's a vast difference between going to Mars and sailing across the ocean, although there are similarities. Would you say that there is a scenario, a circumstance in which Catholics probably should not participate in such exploration?
Well, that's that they're forbidden to practice their faith. What I'm thinking of in this regard, if you study the records of the priests on the American frontier, they would run around districts looking for Catholics who basically had gone off and settled the frontier willy-nilly for whatever reason. And inevitably, when you read the accounts of the pioneer priests, for want of a better word, there'll be things like, went to Smuggler's Cove, found 4 Irish families, none had practiced in 20 years, heard confessions, 2 German families. When it went 30 miles further to Hartnett's Junction, found 7 French families, who'd been away from the sacraments for years. So my suspicion is that if a Musk-like colonization of Mars takes place, some Catholics will go willy-nilly, probably not the most devout. And one way or the other, the church will have to find a way to get to them.
Yeah.
And in that, you have to see the hand of God if it happens that way. Now, the point you make about it being about the length of time to get to Mars, that's true. It would take a long time, 2 years almost, I think. But by the same token, it might be shortened considerably if they use nuclear power.
Yeah, good luck.
In outer space. Well, in outer space, it's a little bit different.
Yeah. I mean, they use them on satellites already. They have nuclear reactors on satellites to keep them going, and it would make sense, but we're not living in a world that makes much sense anymore, so.
Well, no, but it may someday. Who knows? Sense is a funny thing. No matter how far your masters try to banish it, it'll come back because, how do I put this? No matter how powerful your masters, if they declare war on reality, reality has a way of slapping back at them.
Yeah.
And reality always wins, sooner or later, sadly.
Well, let's pray for that. We're almost out of time here with Charles Coulombe. The other scenario I had in my mind, we are down to less than a minute now, but was thinking about military service and how there is a shrinking number of Catholic chaplains serving in the military. And so combat troops were put themselves in some precarious situations with probably not having ready access to last rites or just frequent confessions. And having served in the Marine Corps, I can tell you it is a field ripe with temptation and mortal sins. So I wish we had more time to dive into that. But I got about 30 seconds. What would you say to that, Charles Coulombe?
I would say that the recruitment of military chaplains, the recruitment of military chaplains should be number one on the list of the USCCB. And I'd say number two, today's military is not what we knew.
Yeah. Yeah, that's about all the time we have. But boy, it is precarious, and Catholics should think prudentially before going free willy-nilly into these adventures. At any rate, Charles Coulombe, TumblerHouse.com. God bless you, my friend. Thank you for your time today. We're very grateful to you. That's going to do it for hour number one. And thank you all for joining us this week. We're very grateful to you for hanging out with us. Coming up after the break, Dave Palmer and Thomas Aquinas. Join us if you can.